I've said for a very long time that I just don't do debates. And I mean organized, staged, formal debates where one party stands up and talks for 5 minutes and then they just switch places. I find that absurdly useless. And I hope that today I'll be able to explain why. I just don't think that they're useful in establishing truth based on a preponderance of evidence. So let's do this. I've had a couple of people lately, and by lately I mean for a very, very long time, ask me why I just don't debate people. Now, I used to way back when, but today I don't. Why? Well, it's because I don't really see the utility of the process. Now, don't get me wrong, I do have discussions with the religious all the time. I mean, the organized, regimented debate format where one person gets up and talks for a couple minutes, then the other person gets up and does the same thing, rather rinse repeat. It's a system that I think is way too easy to abuse, and in fact, I do see it being abused constantly. And I'm not the only one who's noticed this. Which brings us to where we are today. So I'm going to explain why I don't like the format, and better yet, I'm going to show you why. So let's get started. So this whole idea came up while I was watching one of Matt Dillahunty's debate breakdown reports. He does that over on his personal channel, and he'll say what he thinks went right and what he thinks went wrong. And more often, it's wrong than right, and I think that's really the problem. So he did this a couple of days ago, as I'm writing this, maybe a week ago, I don't remember, for a debate with a Muslim named Hussein, something like that, I don't remember exactly. As I'm listening to him describe how the whole thing went down, and keep in mind, I haven't even seen the debate yet, on purpose because I wanted to go into this blind, but I kept saying, I would never, ever, ever let him get to that point. Or I'd never have let him get away with that. Because this isn't a conversation. It's not put on for that purpose. It's not two people who are trying to get to the truth. It's two people putting on a stage show for an audience. Actually, it's two stage shows, one in favor, one against. And more often than not, these are just two people who are talking past each other, or even more common, they aren't even addressing each other. I've pointed this out about William Lane Craig in the past, how he'll just show up for a debate with a script. He's saying what he wants to say, but he isn't responding to the other person in the debate. He's not responding to anything. He's just reading off of a pre-written script and telling the audience what they want to hear. Or at least what he hopes they want to hear. And that's not how a credible interlocutor operates. So that's exactly why I don't do debates like that. I am not trying to dance like a trained monkey in front of a live studio audience. I am trying to have an intelligent conversation with someone who is hopefully trying to defend a specific proposition. There has to be a back and forth. You ask me a question, I ask you a question. You point out where you think I'm wrong, and I'm going to do the same to you. You should be able to directly defend your points, and so should I. This should go on whether there's an audience watching or not. We are not here to score brownie points with a bunch of anonymous spectators. We are here to get to the truth as best as we can. So, what I'm going to do today is take that debate, the one with Hussein that Matt Dillahunty was talking about, and it could be any, but this is the one that gave me the idea, so this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to go through Hussein's side, starting with his introduction, and show how I would have responded to it had I actually been there in an actual back and forth conversation. Now, I could do the same thing with Matt's side, but I think we're just going to stick with the theist because that's kind of what we do around here. Now, I'm not going to do the whole debate. That would be utterly insane. I'm just going to do enough to give you some idea of what it would look like to have it in a different format. I figure that would be a whole lot more productive, and according to Matt's description, this was not a productive debate at all. Most of them aren't. So let's take a look and see how it goes.
Today's debate is Islam true or not? I have three arguments for the case of Islam. First being a cumulative argument, with Islam being true based on the argument for contingency or the necessary being, and how Islam is the most compatible for that.
Now, here I would stop him, and you'll notice that I actually stop people a lot. It's kind of how I make my videos. I don't let them just go on and on and on making claims. It's really hard to backtrack to where they first go wrong. Better to just hit them up front and get them to define their terms, which is what I'd want him to do here, before they move on to something else building upon the things that they start with. I'd also ask him to explain what he means by contingency, because there are a lot of different ways to look at that, and also what his methodology is going to be for determining that Islam is the most compatible, or whatever it was that he said. It doesn't need to be a long explanation, but we need to be on the same track if we're going to be talking about the same thing. He could address that in a second. I don't know. Like I said, I haven't heard this, but I'm just spitting this out there as if I had been there on stage with him, and this is what I would do.
The second argument is going to be on the evidence of the Quran, the third being the evidence of prophethood for Muhammad, peace be upon him.
And he didn't. Yes, I know he's just introducing what he's going to do, and I'm probably jumping the gun here, but it's better to ask for clarification early than to wait until you're so buried in all the bullcrap that there's no way back. So let's let him get to his real points, and I'll try to keep my mouth shut until then.
So I'd find it hard to convince everyone if they're agnostic or atheist on the concept of God first.
And there, he just admitted failure. We are less than 30 seconds into the debate, and he's admitted that he won't be able to convince skeptics that his claims are true. And that's kind of a problem, isn't it? I find it difficult to convince people who are not already convinced that my claims are true. So you're only talking about confirmation bias. Debate over. I would never have let that slip by. If you can't convince anyone with evidence, then you're just wasting everyone's time, and here he admits that he's got absolutely nothing. He's going to delve into philosophical arguments because he can't produce anything of substance. This is where we'd have to insert a discussion on how to engage in rational debate, what a valid epistemology is, and how we hope to come to intelligent conclusions. Without that agreement in the front end, everything else is completely pointless. If you are telling me up front that you are not going to be able to convince me intellectually, then you're just wasting my time. I've got better things to do. But let's get back to it, shall we?
So I'm going to use the contingency argument. Pretty much states there's three terms: necessary things, dependent things, and impossible things. Possible things cannot exist. They're like squared circles or a married bachelor by their necessity.
Then you've just defined your God out of the picture. The gods of most of these religious people, they can do anything. They're magic. They have all these omni-properties. Now, some theists try to minimize what their gods can do. They can do anything logically possible. Well, then they're not that hot, are they? Speaking the universe into existence, that isn't logically possible, is it? Because I've made this point before. If your God did create everything, and that's what you're claiming, then he wouldn't have just created the stuff. He would have had to create the concept of the stuff. Before there were trees, the very idea of what trees are, that didn't exist. So there was no such thing as a tree. He'd have to say, well, this is what a tree is going to be. And then he could make the tree. Or here's what color blue is going to be. And then he could make something blue. Or here's what good is going to be. And then that concept would just spring into existence. You kind of get the idea. You can't have a thing if there's no concept of that thing. I can't say, well, I'm going to make a Flarfignugle, if there's no such thing as a Flarfignugle. I can make something and call it a Flarfignugle, at which point in time I've just defined the word into existence. God must have done the exact same thing, just on a much grander scale. So the idea that you can't have a married bachelor, or that somehow God is restricted from making a married bachelor, that is nonsense. God makes the concepts. He can do anything he wants. And in fact, if he's powerful enough to make the concepts in the first place, then he ought to be powerful enough to change the concepts when he wants. He could decide completely out of the blue for no reason whatsoever that up is down, left is right, and suddenly that's what would be true. The entire thing is utter nonsense, based on their claims about their deities. Let's not pretend otherwise.
There's a necessary thing. It doesn't need, require, and is independent. There's other attributes I'll go over later. There's a dependent thing, so it depends on something. There's a reliant, subject to addition and subtraction, can be rearranged and thought of otherwise in abstraction. So the proposition goes, there cannot be a world with only dependent things without a reference to an independent thing, as a dependent thing cannot continue to exist on their own. Existence is only explicable with reference to an independent existence, as an impossible existence do not exist by logical necessity. Furthermore, dependent existences can self-generate or self-maintain.
I just let him run on there for a while just to get it out in the open. I'm not trying to be overly argumentative. The question, though, is, how do you know any of that? I mean, from the perspective of his proposed deity, why would any of that be true? Better yet, how does he know that any of that is true? Because if his God wanted to make a universe filled with all independent things, does that mean he couldn't? Does that mean he believes that his God would be so limited? I mean, that's a really good question to ask. What he's doing here, what a lot of them do, is taking observations that we make in the real world and then just working backwards towards his emotionally comforting goal. He wants there to be a God. Well, the topic of debate isn't what you want to be. It's, is Islam true? Now, how do you get to that point? Not what do you think is true, not what do you believe is true, not what do you have faith is true, what is actually true? That's the whole point of the debate, isn't it? And as he's already admitted that he has a problem convincing anybody who isn't already convinced that anything he says is true, and he's debating with someone who isn't convinced of his religious claims, how exactly does he expect to get there? That's the real problem, because he's there to talk to the audience. He's not there to talk to Matt. He's doing what every single apologist does. He's there to reassure the Muslims in the audience, and these debates tend to pack the peanut gallery with people who already support the religious notion, and not to get to the actual truth of the proposition. They're not there to answer the question, because the religious person doesn't care if the question is true or not. He just doesn't give a damn. None of them do. That's the problem. If you listen to some of Matt's other debate deconstructions, he usually says that the theists didn't even address the point of the debate. They engaged in apologetics. But that's not what they're there for.
That'd be a miracle.
Something else that you haven't established as factually real. That's another discussion that would need to be had, and one that the theists simply wouldn't win. Now, I'm not trying to make this overly difficult. I'm trying to raise the level of discourse. There is absolutely no difference between saying, well, I don't get it, therefore God, and I don't get it, therefore leprechauns. They are the exact same thing, except in the minds of the terminally biased theist. Now, have you ever heard a theist say, well, you can't compare God to Santa Claus? Why not? Because they're emotionally attached to one of them and not to the other. But that doesn't mean anything. Both of them are just made-up stories based on every single shred of evidence that we have. This is exactly why he has so many problems convincing the non-believers, because they don't rely on faith and fifis, and that's the only thing he's got. I see so many theists saying, but what I believe isn't rational. Then you have no business believing in it at all. Dumb is not a birth defect. Get better.
So there's a case like contingency through fine-tuning. You can say the universe is fine-tuned for life by either contingency or necessity. If it is fine-tuned by necessity, then a necessary existence must account for that necessary fact of fine-tuning. If you looked at it through contingency, then a necessary existence must account for any series of contingencies. So the universe is fine-tuned for life, therefore the universe is fine-tuned for life by a necessary existence.
Except you haven't established any of that. You don't just get to say, well, God done it. Where is your evidence for any of that? Yet this is all that the religious do. It's why I advocate turning it around on them. God didn't do it. The flying spaghetti monster did. Prove me wrong. I am using the exact same level of evidence that you are. Or invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies. Just because you say a thing is true, that doesn't make it true. Just because you have faith that a thing is true, that doesn't mean that it's true. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Just piling absurdities on absurdities, that doesn't make any of it less absurd. Now, had I been there and this wasn't a formal debate, look at how many times I would have broken in and gotten clarification on his points. Meanwhile, Matt is just sitting there taking notes. Now, I'm not being upset at Matt because that's the format that he agreed to, but I would never put up with any of this crap. There just isn't this level of direct confrontation on the bad ideas as they come up. And that's really the only time that you can address these things, when they come up. Otherwise, the theist has already moved on without challenge, and in fact, they're counting on that. Why? Because this isn't about a debate for the truth. It's about comforting the religious in the audience. And that's why these debates are such a complete waste of time.
And then it's saying like everything is made up of pieces, is dependent. The universe is made up of pieces, and this would include the multiverse as well, even though I don't believe it, and I think it's a fringe science theory. Therefore, the universe is dependent, and you can even see this mathematically, like any set with more than one member is dependent on its members. An infinite set has more than one member, therefore an infinite set is dependent on its members.
Which isn't really true. Then you start pointing out all of the logical fallacies and their eyes just kind of glaze over. I had a talk with Deconverted Man over why his responses to a theist video are so much longer than mine. And he says it's because he points out all of the logical fallacies. Great, but most of the time they don't even know what those are, nor do they care. Now, nothing against him at all, we all do things a little bit differently, but I've realized over the years that the religious, by and large, and I'm certainly not saying that it's every single theist automatically, but from extensive experience, I think we've all come to realize that they aren't at all interested in objective reality. Some might say that they are, but when they get backed into a corner, they will admit that they just want to believe. What is defensible, what is demonstrable, those things really don't matter if they don't stroke their immature egos. I am not trying to appeal to the emotionally immature. I am trying to get to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And the absurdly overwhelming majority of theists that I've talked to, at least, they're not. They just want to be happy. But happiness derived from believing a lie, that's just stupid. And I am ever so tired of stupid people. Knock it off.
Okay, so argument for oneness. So we've got like why a necessary existence is more probable. So a necessary existence cannot be any other way, therefore there cannot be more than one necessary existence.
Now, you will notice that he just leapt to, well, I'm right, so let's continue, without challenge, right? The debate format sucks. I would have leapt in there immediately. Well, you haven't established that at all. Not that he cares, because again, this is not about truth. It's about comfort. He just wants to believe. No matter how many emotional diatribes, logical fallacies, empty claims, and absurd preconceptions that he pushes past, truth will never be the result. He's just trying to talk himself and other theists into thinking that they were right all along. And this is the danger of starting with an unsupported conclusion just because it really makes you feel good, and then backtracking to fill in all of those troublesome gaps in your game plan. These people are doing intelligence wrong. It's really not that hard to see.
So a necessary existence, this is pretty much what I said. This would disqualify the Trinity and the Christian concept of a God, as well as obviously polytheism.
It disqualifies all theism, period. Because here's what's going on here. Let me know if you see this too. He's taking the things that he already believes and he's baldly rationalizing in convenient facts to fill in all the gaps that might make him emotionally uncomfortable. Well, I already believe in a monotheistic God, so I'm going to say this thing that appeals to me on a theistic level, but that does away with these other pesky religions that I don't like. This is not looking at all positions and finding out which one of them is best supported by the evidence that we have at hand. It's cherry picking. And someone who is a polytheist, say, like maybe a Hindu, would come up with a different set of rationalizations to support their own preconceived notions. Well, this proves polytheism right and everybody else is wrong. No, it just proves that you're desperately looking for a way to get to your emotionally comforting conclusions. Cherry picking doesn't get you anywhere. Stop it. Seek help.
So then we get to attributes of the necessary being based off this logic.
Which logic is that? Because again, we see that they're just cherry picking to match their preconceived notions. For one thing, you can't determine the attributes of any real thing without having that real thing available for study. You can't just say, well, here's what a sheep is like, if you've never actually seen a sheep. It's like saying, well, here's what a dragon is like. Yeah, you're just making that up. You have no way to objectively validate anything that you're saying, and that goes for gods as well as mythic animals. So you can't just tell me what God is like until you can show me a God, or at the very least, show me how you've had direct, demonstrable experience with a God so that you can come to these conclusions rationally. You can't just wish these things into existence, and that's all these people are doing. Now, this thing is already getting pretty long, and I don't want to belabor the point. I just wanted to get to his claims on Muhammad being a prophet, so I think I'm going to skip forward a little bit just to get to his last point. Therefore, Chipmunk Ho!
So I would say that it would be infinite, doesn't depend on anything, it would be one, which again disqualifies Trinity and monotheism, doesn't have a cause, no beginning, no end, no parts. The first cause has a will and intelligence created the universe. There's space, cannot be seen, no way body, and then all powerful is also disqualified Judaism, as there's many stories in Judaism where Jewish rabbis debated God actually submitted to his creation. So, do the disbelievers not observe the heavens and the earth were closed? Oh, sorry. I still have a little bit more on this.
This is what happens when you just read a script instead of actually having a coherent conversation. I'm not getting mad at him, but it's clear through this entire thing that he's just reading off of a screen. Whether he knows any of this information or not, who can tell? This is a debate between Matt and Muslim Wikipedia, and a lot of them are doing this, including, often, the aforementioned William Lane Craig. This is just phoning it in. It's a complete waste of time.
So there's a Quranic quote on this, and there's some other Quranic quotes that essentially reference the contingency argument or a necessary being as well. It's kind of littered through the Quran. Man, I lost it. I'll just go into the next thing.
That's just... Oops, sorry, I just lost my place in my script. I'd be thinking, why the hell am I even bothering to talk to this guy? Because this guy isn't talking to me, he's talking to the audience. But, like he said, let's just go on. I've wasted enough time on this already.
So, evidence from the Quran. Do disbelievers not observe that the heavens and earth were closed? Then we opened them and we created water from every living thing. They would not believe. So, this is it's explaining to the viewers, literally, that the Quran states all living things are made of water, and this is true as everything is made up of cells that contain water, obviously.
Sure, let's just read shit into it. Because if you ever listen to a Muslim trying to prove, and there's some pretty big air quotes there, that the Quran has any actual science in it, they're just reading everything they can into it. Well, I can interpret it like this. Yeah, but your interpretation doesn't matter. Only what is actually true does. But this is what they meant. Okay, how do you know that? Better yet, how do you verify it? This is where the whole thing becomes a giant article of faith, and your faith doesn't mean anything. This is why you have to start asking questions. If the writers of the Quran supposedly knew about that then, why did it take so long for science to catch up? I mean, what he's got on screen now, and we're going to skip ahead because I'm still looking for all that Muhammad stuff, but if they knew that, why did it take so long for humans to come up with Big Bang cosmology? Explain that for me if you would. The reality never, ever, ever reflects the belief. It's just interpreted that way in retrospect. But that's not how these things go.
So, there's another one, is also mentioned in the article, which is Big Bang, and started as smoke. There's also a quick on this, and it talks about how there's a star forming of gas, which is nebula, which is one of the smoke in the universe. In that same article, there's also a information about the trend, which talks about the expanding universe, and this is another control. So, this is the expanding universe, all systems on heaven, constructed strength, and the standard. Okay, so there's and I think also more probable, there's what we see in reality, and this is reflected in Chronicles prophecies, where things follow the so names I preserve proof, and they still generate our science. It is not now known, the science was protected there just a couple years ago. And one of the things is actually, so two stars, actually, well, the rest actually volume of the science later, which makes it kind of like Earth's magnetic sphere, as long as all planets they see, the following spheres, the astronomy, shape, and space, a principal role in planetary properly, and they go and see that other nations developed continues to see state under protection of this magnetic environment. Now, you just say that was my first master. Okay, so proof of prophethood, right? So say I got you to accept the necessary being. You know, you can even see some of these scientific evidence as, you know, facts for the Quran. You know, is Muhammad worthy of being a prophet to you all?
Sorry, he just went on for a really, really, really long time, and what I said could be applied to all of it. If Islam knew any of these things 1400 years ago, why didn't medical science or physics or whatever know about it 1400 years ago? That is not how the real world works. So finally, we got to prophethood, and I'm going to skim through this quickly. He's going to run into the same problems here that he did before because he hasn't established that there are any gods for whom anyone can be a prophet. But let's go through it. Mostly what he said there was just complete nonsense. So let's read what he's got on screen. There are a ton of bald assertions being made there that cannot be independently validated. He asks if Muhammad is doing it in any self-serving way. Well, I don't know. Who knows? Who cares? We do know that there are plenty of people who claim to be prophets who aren't doing it to be rich. Does that make anything that they say actually true? Because that's what this whole debate is supposed to be about, remember? Is Islam true? So if you want to prove that Muhammad was a prophet of an actual real God, then you have to prove that God is real first. He hasn't done that. He hasn't even tried. This is all meant to stroke the egos of those who already believe, and that is a pointless waste of time. All he's done here is say that Muhammad really was a good guy. Okay, I mean, that's cherry picking and all. Muhammad was a warlord who engaged in several religious wars and who killed a whole lot of people, both directly and indirectly. None of this actually proves that his claims about revelation from Allah were true. That's the point. This is where I'd be stepping in and asking how any of this proves that Muhammad was a prophet of a, at least presently, unproven God. Where is your evidence? Because I'm pretty sure he doesn't have any. So I'm just going to stop here because the whole point of this was an exercise to point out the inherent problems in the debate format. It's not about finding truth, it's about pandering to the audience. It's not about having a vigorous back and forth conversation where both sides are held accountable for their claims. It's just about a stage show, and I don't do stage shows. I am not going to let the theist run away with the conversation, gish-galloping away, making empty claims that they hope that they can throw around faster than I can respond to them. Hard pass on that. I don't expect them to do that with me either. I am there to get to the truth, without regard for anybody's feelings. Most theists, at least the ones that I've talked to, they're not. They want fifis and faith, not facts and evidence. These people are just not worth my time. And in my opinion, they're not worth yours either. It's why I'm not in a hurry to climb up on a stage with any of them. If you want to have a discussion, great. If you want to have a debate, look elsewhere. I am not going to play any of these stupid games.